session on leading digital business transformation and innovation program. It is a live virtual program and it's scheduled to run from July 1st to July 31st. And it's a 5-week program that has been specifically created to help leaders, executives across all business functions to use digital technologies. The program blends the discipline of the on-campus experience that ISB is renowned for with our global faculty and advanced curriculum. And the program is designed by Srini Raju Center for IT and the Network Economy, which is a technology research center at ISB in collaboration with our Center for Executive Education. The program director is Professor Deepa Mani. She is a faculty in the information systems area and a research fellow at the Indian School of Business. She's also the executive director of Srini Raju Center for Technology for IT and the Network Economy at ISB. And her research interests are at the intersection of technology, organizations, and society. Professor Deepa also works closely with the industry to drive innovation and strategies for the digital economy, and she works closely with the central and state governments to explore the impact of technology interventions in areas such as education, healthcare, and urbanization. So I'll hand it over to Professor Deepa. She'll be covering a brief introduction of all of the modules covered in the program, and she would also be happy to take any questions in case you have in any of the modules. Over to you, Professor Deepa.
Thank you, Ashwini. Very warm welcome to you. One of you have your hands up. Sridhar, is it? I don't seem to have.
Sridhar, do you have any question?
I don't have any question. Just now I raised, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for your time this Saturday morning. It's wonderful to have, the turnout that we have. Like Ashwini said, my name is Deepa. I'm a faculty with the information systems area here at ISB. I'm also the research director the executive director for the Technology Research Center here at ISB. It's called SRITNI. And we work very closely with industry as well as government to drive impact in the area of technology and business at the intersection of tech and business, as well as tech and policy. I wanted to take some time this morning to speak to you about the program, the center's flagship program, which is Leading Digital Business Transformation Initiatives, and also answer any questions that you might have or any clarifications that you seek about this program. The way we've structured it is, I thought I would provide you some context for the program, and then talk a little bit about the structure of the program, and then finally end with a question and answer session where we can address your doubts, concerns, and answer any open questions that you might have. I will, I prefer an interactive mode of engagement. And so, I will also be monitoring the chat. So please type your questions, and even as we proceed, I can pause every few minutes or so to try and answer any questions that's coming up about the content itself, okay? Let me share my screen and we'll start with the presentation. It's going to be difficult for me to actually look at chat as well. So I'll probably go back to the screen every now and then check if any questions you have. Okay, so here's what I thought I would do. I'll start with, providing some context, and then talk about the program structure, and then talk about who this program is ideally suited for. And then, like I said, we'll close with Q&A. I do want to make sure that, we have time to answer any questions that you might have about the program. In terms of context, there's actually, there's a lot of context, but what I thought I would focus on were about 3 fundamental shifts that we are seeing documenting in the business world around us. The first of these is a very fundamental shift from what I call the shift in the locus of decision-making in organizations from minds to machines. If you look at how automation has evolved over the past few decades, the very first phase of automation or technology innovation was about getting machines to do physical work that humans used to engage in, right? So it used to be, this is the earliest innovations with the steam engine, with electricity, where complex work in factories, which was time consuming, dexterous, and incredibly tedious, would now get replaced by these large machines that could do physical work. The second phase of technology innovation was about getting machines to do cognitive work, right? Which was telling the machines how we thought and then getting them to do that work incredibly efficiently, accurately. If you think about, for instance, something like payroll processing, which I'm sure none of you own in your organizations, all of it is outsourced, right? But earlier, payroll was a manually done job. Now you would codify how payroll processing was done. You would write a program for it, put it in a system, and now the system could do this very task of payroll processing very efficiently at scale, generating huge efficiencies and productivity gains, to the extent that it's a function or an organization unto itself, which doesn't even sit within organizations. These were the early forms of tech innovation. The limitation, as powerful as it was with the second machine age, as Eric Brynjolfsson calls it, and from where I've taken these shifts, as powerful as it was, the limitation was that we know much more than we can tell, right? You can recognize your mother's face, you know how to climb a flight of stairs, you know how to ride a bicycle, but you don't know how you're going to codify it and specify it in a program. And that was the limitation of the first wave of machines, which were doing cognitive work. Enter now the second machine age, where machines don't get told what to do, but they learn on their own. We give them data, we give them outcomes, and they look at the data and the outcomes to come up with the best and the optimal way of achieving those outcomes. And this is this whole field of machine learning, artificial intelligence, deep learning that has a myriad of applications in sensory applications, which are, vision, sound, image processing, etc., which has made huge leaps. There are applications in gross motor coordination, enter robots, etc. And there is cognitive processing as well, right? So several applications that reflect the power of machines today and how they're shifting the locus of decision making. Here's like a really cool application. I mean, I found this in Science in the area of medicine and medical diagnostics. This is a peer-reviewed journal called Science, which was recently published. And what they did was they gave, a bunch of radiology reports to the machines and said, here, go figure out, which of these reports have cancer markers. And over the last 12 to 15 years, biocomputational scientists have figured out about 10 to 12 markers of cancer, using similar data. What was remarkable was that in just a few hours, the machines picked up those 10 to 12 markers. But then, the biocomp guys said, let's run this a little more, right? So they ran this a little, they ran the algo for a little bit more time. And what they found was that this particular algo just did not stop at that 10 to 12. It picked up 7 additional markers. And when the scientists ran a predictive, when they ran an impact assessment for the markers, they found that it was correlated significantly with both early detection as well as ultimate survival, the two being strongly correlated. This was not, a completely surprising finding. This is but an example of the technological power. Of course, to take this at scale, there are a whole lot of business factors that need to come in. But the technological advancement that has been made in this area is what this particular example is illustrative of. What we did, and in terms of the economic impact, here is another quick anecdote, right? So what you're seeing here is we took every one of the 104 occupations in India, and we gave them a exposure to machine learning score, right? This was based on the workers, and this was a pre-pandemic score. So this was sometime in 2019, end of 2019, and then again in 2020, we ran this survey, which kind of led us to assign a machine learning score for every occupation in India, 104 occupations. We then used those scores to assess what is the exposure to machine learning of sectors in India. And then when the pandemic hit, we had all this data which told us, how machine learning occupations and sectors, what was the economic dip in those sectors versus in sectors that were not machine learning ready. And if you see this line over here, we got from the National Payment Corporation of India, we got data on, what was the number of payments, what was the value of payments in these different sectors and jobs. I'm just giving you a very small snapshot of the analysis. And what we found was, if you look at the value of payments, we called, the sectors with low machine learning as highly vulnerable sectors. And if you see these highly vulnerable sectors, which had very low exposure to machine learning, very low exposure to machines and automation, the decline or the dip in value of payments as well as in count of payments was much higher than the sectors for which these, this level of preparedness or automated preparedness did not exist. So it's two things that we documented. One, there is significant technological advancements. Organizations are beginning to absorb those advancements. And organizations that absorb those advancements are far more resilient in the face of exogenous business shocks than organizations and sectors and jobs that are not. And this is particularly, it has interesting implications for capabilities that you build as an organization, the future of work as we foresee it, and a bunch of other things. But for us, this was a telling story of the economic impact of investments in AI. This also we did this then at the district level, which led to implications for the Economic Advisor's Office on which districts to open up, right? So these are significant investments with significant impact. And this is a discernible shift that is happening in organizations. Let me just quickly go to chat. All right. The second big shift is from the core to crowd. As the locus of decision-making shifts from mind to machines, the ambit of decision-making also shifts from the core of the organization, where it sits in an ivory tower with 5 people deciding what should sales forecasts be, to the crowd. The more data you bring in to decision-making, the better your decision. The more data you bring in, the more accurate your decision. Data doesn't sit with one group of individuals, it's distributed. And therefore, the extent to which you bring data into your organization to inform your decisions is another big shift that is happening in highly successful, high-performing organizations. And what we, here are many examples. I don't want to go into this, but this is essentially the focus on all of these is about how you can harness the power of the crowd. There are two things about involving a larger set of people in decision-making. One, data is distributed. The best information doesn't reside with a set of people. Therefore, you bring in more information. The second is that the more distant a solver is from your problem, the more creative is going to be the solution. I don't know if you all read about this, but there was an oil crisis. There was an oil spill in Alaska, and they had to find out how to save the waters. And what they did was they opened up this problem on Innocentive, and the solution did not come from somebody in the oil industry. It came from someone in the construction industry, right? So the extent to which you can bring in distributed networks of solvers into the ambit of innovation, the more creative is the solution. How do you do that? How do you, as an organization who has traditionally held R&D, held decision-making as a closed function, how do you make it an open function? These are challenges that organizations face today, but with significant implications. There are many business models that are built on these principles. And we'll talk about this. I'll talk about this a little bit at the end, but I'll also talk about it. We'll talk a lot about it during the course of the program as well. The final shift, which also this is motivated, which I believe is a fundamental technology enabled shift in business today, is from product to platform. I ask you, what is the product in the auto industry? If I ask you, what is the product in the auto industry, what would be, what would your responses be? Siddharth, I'll answer your question in the end. But tell me a little bit about what you all think is the product in the auto industry. Type, you can just chat over there, you can type. I think you can type, right? Vehicle, accessories, cars, trucks, bikes, tires. Okay, so cars and parts, vehicle parts. But some of you have also talked about mobility, convenience. Some of these things are also about, for the longest time, right? If you think about it, for the longest time, auto companies were in the business of making cars. Here was a product. You had a downstream, you had like an upstream value chain, starting from the lab to a bunch of parts manufacturers, a bunch of things that would lead you to assemble a car, and then you would take it to market through, a distribution network, as well as a marketing capabilities would lead you to market this car in the market. Is Uber in the business of cars? Uber is not in the business of cars, but is Uber a competitor to a General Motors or a Ford or a Mahindra? Is Ola a competitor to these auto manufacturers? It is. To the extent it affects asset ownership or car ownership, it is a competitor to the product manufacturers. But Uber is not a product. Uber, as you all are pointing out, is a platform. The new companies, the digital entrepreneurs, the tech giants who come in to traditional industries come in with a platform model. A Ford, a Mahindra, or Toyota, they all know how to compete with each other. But do they know how to, will the same principles of competition apply to an Uber? The answer is no. Because the principles of competition is about ownership of capabilities. Much like we as a university, we own capabilities, we own the buildings and the assets and the resources and all of these that are required to create value. But a Coursera does not do that. They bring together an ecosystem that creates value. You bring together suppliers of education and create value creating exchanges with the demand side to drive education. And Uber brings together consumers and service providers to, in this case, the drivers, to create an ecosystem that creates value. Both are different kinds of value creation, but if you want to compete with them, and you can, you need to know what is the principles of competition and ownership that they possess. How are platforms different from products? Another example, right? In circa 2007, there were 5 phone companies that owned 95% of the phone market, right? The Motorola, Sony Ericsson, LG, Nokia, they owned 95% of global profits. In 2007, Apple would come in and within a year would single-handedly command 95% of the market. What did Apple do? Apple also had a phone. Apple also had a linear value chain for its phones. People talk about the killer iPhone, but it wasn't just the iPhone. What they did was on top of the iPhone, they built a two-sided market. They built a platform for apps. Combine that with the phone is what led to Apple's eventual dominance, right? So platforms are not something that you can ignore while competing in the digital economy. And all of these together, Chandra, I'll come to you in the very end, if you don't mind. I'll just take your question, yeah? So you come to this as a combination of 3 forces that are driving value in the digital economy. These are correlated with other shifts, and these are technological shifts, keep in mind. But when they translate, when you absorb these, they have to be wrapped in a business model that creates value. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. I think this is so illustrative of the time that we've lived in, or the last year or so. that this is incredibly poignant. But at the same time, the recent pandemic has posed unprecedented challenges, both economic as well as health-wise, to the country. And what this has also done is it has accelerated technology adoption significantly. What the graph on the left is about Zoom and Skype and a bunch of collaborative software that all of you will attest to, that has grown significantly. What you see on the right is the significant growth. TensorFlow, it's an open ML platform where you can create these complex applications. Huge growth. In the face of social distancing as a policy, in the face of people's consumers' buyer behaviors changing, in the face of all of this, you've seen an incredible rise in ML adoption, not just worldwide, here as well. We have an AI index at SRITMI, and if you look at how this has risen over the last year or so, even in India, it is significant and cannot be ignored. None of these changes can be ignored. It is imperative there is a term to describe this. It's called hysteresis, where if there are changes, when the initial conditions change, the world does not go back to that initial state. And I truly believe that's true here as well. It's not that once the pandemic has eased its pressure, we'll go back to an original state of business. There are certain buyer behaviors, there are certain demand functions, there are certain consumer behaviors that will get altered irrevocably. And we will have to operate in what would be the new normal for an extended period of time. All of these are not easy to incorporate in a business. You told me, I asked you, is it easy for a Ford or a Toyota to compete with an Uber like it does with its other competitors? And a bunch of you said no. Why not? Why is it difficult? Why is it difficult for a Barnes & Noble, when an Amazon came in, Barnes & Noble doesn't exist? I'll tell you the most persistent trend in business, and this is not born by, it's not my opinion. I generally, tend to stay away from opinions. This is data. The most persistent trend in business that has been recorded repeatedly in management research is the inability of an incumbent to change when technology and markets change. It is the gross inability that has been recorded. Barnes & Noble gave way to an Amazon, Blockbuster gave way to a Netflix. Not one of the independent disk drive companies exists in its original form today. Mini computer companies gave way to the personal computer, Sears, Walmart. You could just go on and on, okay? So it's a most persistent trend. Why is it? Why is that the case? Why do you believe that's the case? Inertia, resistant to change. So you see, we always implicate companies, right? We do this. Why do they miss innovations? Why are they unable to change the business model? This is a class unto itself. So I'm not going to get into that too much. But what I will tell you is think about this, right? So what this is telling you is that here is a General Motor, right? It's moving along, and it's competing. Every year it's making its products better. Where does an Uber come in? Does an Uber meet it at its performance threshold? It doesn't. An Uber sneaks up on it because an Uber doesn't look like it. An Uber is a low margin, inferior product. It's a service. Lo and behold, I'm making incredible cars for the future customer, the fashion forward, future forward customer. And here is a service, a taxi service that's coming in. Should I take it seriously? No. Digital competitors and their business models look very, very different from an incumbent business models. They don't meet you here, they sneak up on you. They are inferior in their origin. But what they do with time is that they add layers and layers to their products, ultimately intersecting with your demand and your performance trajectory, and in some sense, either reinventing the entire industry or disrupting it in a very fundamental way, where none of the incumbents stay in their original form. How you take that technology and your ability to wrap the three technologies and those shifts in a business model that creates and extracts value from customers is a significant source of competitive advantage. The most persistent trend in business is the inability of organizations to be able to do that. Together, all of these factors have motivated us to launch this program, which is about all of the things I talked about. We'll talk about emerging technologies. We'll talk about what are the shifts in the technological landscape and how are they impacting business. We will talk about how do you craft business models around these technologies. We will talk about what are the changes you need in the organization to be able to drive these changes and create value. And we'll also talk about each of these in a very fundamental, some of these in a very fundamental way, like AI, data, ML. We'll talk about this, which we think deserves, significant attention in tomorrow's economy. We'll talk about them as well in great detail. So that in some sense, these shifts, the constraints they pose on organizations and the need to leverage those shifts to drive change is what is in some sense the strongest motivation for this course. Like Keen said, the difficulty lies, it's not that Ford or Mahindra cannot design a taxi service, but they need to break away from who they are to be able to design it. And how do you retain what is valuable? How do you even know what is valuable about the past? And how do you then embrace a new future while straddling that old past with the new? The difficulty is not in developing new ideas. It is in escaping from old ones. It requires a different mindset. It requires a different culture. And it requires different principles of organizational change to be able to do it. And that's all of the things that we will talk about in this program. I'm going to pause at this point before I move into the structure and just Rama, I'm not sure which one, Rama, Ashwini, is it possible to unmute people? And if they can ask questions, that's fine, because somebody's raised their hands. I know Chandra's, it keeps popping up for me.
Yeah, Chandra can talk. Yeah. Chandrasekhar Subramaniam, your hand is raised. Is there a question you want to ask? No response, Deepa.
Okay, all right. Ram, where is the Q&A? I just thought I saw something from the, okay, here it is, yeah. Move this here. Now, Rama, so this is very different. For instance, there is very little. So the one part that is an overlap over there is the business models part. The rest of it, for instance, we don't talk about AI, we don't talk about ML, we don't talk about competing with data and analytics, and we don't talk about leadership.